Okay, let's talk about how to use a spreadsheet, which we're going to use for several projects in this class. And we can use something like Excel, but in this class, we're going to primarily use Google Sheets. So the first thing I want to do is just show you kind of navigate around a spreadsheet. And the first thing we have is the name of the spreadsheet, which this is untitled. So let's give this a name, how to spreadsheet. All right. So the name is right there. Also within this spreadsheet, we have tabs, a tab bar down here, and these tabs are links to the different sheets. So this sheet is called long. We have a second sheet here that is called wide. We can add a sheet and give it a name. All right. And if you click on the little pop-up menu, you can see there's other things that we can do with sheets, such as copy a sheet, or duplicate or delete, etc. All right. Up at the top, we have navigation menus, and we have a navigation toolbar here. And importantly, we have this little function fx. This is a formula bar, and it'll be populated if we put a formula in one of these cells. Okay, so what a spreadsheet is a matrix of cells, and this matrix has columns, and the matrix has rows, and each of these individual boxes is called a cell, and that cell takes some value. So for example, the value of this cell is 68. All right. The rows are identified by numbers. This is row 4. This is row 16. The columns are identified by letter. This is column B. This is column G. One of the things that is quite nice that we might want to do is we might want to freeze a row, one or more rows, or one or more columns. So for example, let's freeze row 1. So I'm going to go up to View, Freeze. I can put one row, or up to row 1. Let's just do that. And the advantage of that is when I scroll, that row stays in view. So I know what these columns are. All right. The columns of data are labeled by column headers or column names. All right. I might also want to freeze, if I have a lot of columns of data, I might want to freeze certain columns. For example, let's freeze the first 2 columns. Right? Now, when I scroll over, you can see the first 2 columns are frozen, and I can see what that row is. Okay. The individual cells have addresses, and the address is the row and the number. Or actually, it's the reverse. It's the column label and the row name. So the address of this cell here with the value 13 is D9. It's in column D and row 9. The address of this cell here is G17. All right. Blocks of cells have a range. So for example, if I highlight these cells here, that range is C through H 4. And we can write that down like this. C4 colon H4. And I've not put my letters, my my column addresses using all caps, that is fine. Right? Here's a block of cells that are all in one column, and that range that I've just highlighted is D3 through D17. So that would look something like this: D3 through D17. All right. I can highlight a matrix here. Let's highlight a smaller matrix. This matrix is the address or the range of a matrix is identified by the top left cell and the bottom right cell. So the top left cell is D5, the bottom right cell is H13. So this range is D5 through H13. And that would look like this: D5 through H13. Okay, we want to make our spreadsheet pretty, and we can see that, for example, the column headers, we can't see the complete label because the label is too long for the width of the column. We can change the width of the column by hovering over that little vertical line there. And you can see the icon change, the cursor icon, and we can just make it wider or shorter, right? And we can do that for multiple columns at the same time by just highlighting some columns, hover over one of the vertical bars, it doesn't matter, and widen it, and you can see it widens all of them simultaneously. We can also automate that. So for example, if I just double click, hover, and then double click, it will widen that column to the length of the longest value. And the longest value in this column is in row 1. It's the column header. So it's made the column as wide as that. We can just do that for all the columns simultaneously and get something that looks like that. Whoops, let's try that again. Here we go. All right. In general, these big wide columns with just in which the data values don't take up much of that width is not very efficient. And we can make this prettier by wrapping the text. So for example, let's take the first row and make it make the height higher. All right. And then I'm just going to click into that cell, and I'm going to go to the text wrapping icon and click the pop-up menu, and I'm going to click the middle icon there for wrap, and I'm going to shorten that column, right? And we can do that simultaneously for all of them. Click icon for wrap, and now let's make all those columns less wide so it looks a little bit better, right? That looks pretty good, or it looks better at least. You can see that some of these column labels span 3 lines, so we could just make that first row have even more height. Okay, let's leave it at this and show how we might want to make this prettier. So for example, we can justify these column labels, center justify them. Right now they're left justified, so let's center justify them. And we can also justify them up down. So that would move them to the top. That moves them to the bottom. Let's move them to the center. Oops, I don't know what happened. Oh, that looks good. All right. So that is one way of making prettier labels. Finally, one thing we might do is we could merge cells, and I'll show you merging cells when we look at another spreadsheet. Okay, let's talk about how to organize data. And there are a number of ways of organizing data. The data on this spreadsheet are organized in long format. And in long format, all of the values of a variable are in a single column. So for example, this variable here, standard length, these are the measurements of a fish called a three-spine stickleback, which we're going to look at in this class. This is basically the length of the fish in millimeters. And you can see that all of the values for both the freshwater fish and the marine fish are in a single column. Okay. This format, long format, is really good for archiving data that you want to analyze in specialized statistical software. If you're going to do all of the analysis in Excel, there are better ways of organizing your data. And one good way to organize your data is in what I would call wide format. And in wide format, what we've done is we've split the rows of freshwater and marine, and we've taken those values and we've separated them into separate columns. So for standard length, we have both the freshwater data and the marine data. And for depth at spine 2, we have the freshwater data and the marine data, right? This format is called wide because we've taken the values of a single variable like standard length and we've organized them so that they are in a, we've organized them so that the table is wider in order to contain them. Note importantly that I've given an ID to my freshwater fish and marine fish, and I don't just call the freshwater fish 1 through 10 and the marine fish 1 through 10, but those would not be unique IDs if both the freshwater fish were ID'd 1 and the marine fish were ID'd 1. So I've prefixed that number with FW for freshwater and MR for marine. So we have unique IDs for the freshwater fish and the marine fish. There's no fish that has the same ID. All right. If we were going to turn this long format data into that wide format data, we might want to do something like this. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that freeze, right? And let's create two ID columns. So I'm going to highlight the B column. I'm going to go to insert, and I'm going to insert a column to the left of the column that I've just highlighted. And I'm going to take those IDs there and cut and paste them. I'm using Command X or Control X on Windows to cut, and I'm using Command V or Control V on Windows to paste. And now we have the IDs for the freshwater fish. So I'm going to call this row freshwater, and I'm going to call, or this column freshwater and this column marine. And the other thing we need is, if you look at our already formatted Y table, we've got two rows of column headers. The first row identifies the measurement. The second row identifies which group that measurement was taken from. So let's go back to long. Let's create a second row. I'm going to highlight row 1. I'm going to go to insert, scroll down to rows. I'm going to insert one row above. And in that first box there, I'm going to call it ID. I'm now going to merge those two cells because these are both ID columns. So we're going to go to this icon here, merge cells. I'm going to center justify and vertical align. Nice. All right. And now we have two columns and with of the variable ID. Let's do that for the second. I'm not going to do that for all of these columns, but let's just do it with one more. Source. I'm going to go to column D. I'm going to insert a new column in front of it. Cut marine, paste marine, put source up here, merge, center, copy freshwater marine, paste it, all right? And now I have the source for each. Notice that that's really redundant. In the wide formatted data, we don't have that because we don't need those columns anymore. In fact, it doesn't make any sense to have those columns. So let's just delete those. So I'm going to highlight the two columns that we're going to delete. We're going to go to Edit, Delete, column C and D. There we go. So now let's do a column like this. Insert column left, take the marine, paste the marine, put standard length up there, copy freshwater and marine, merge these cells, center it. It's already centered, right? Very nice. And we could do that now for each of these columns, and we'd have something that looks like this. All right. Let's talk about making formulas. So, for example, let's compute the mean standard length for each of the groups of fish, for the freshwater fish and the marine fish. So this is just simply the average. So I'm going to put mean, and in cell C14, I want to compute the average of these numbers, the average length of the freshwater fish. All right. I don't want to do that on a calculator and then put that number here. Never, ever, ever make your computations in a calculator. A spreadsheet is a calculator, and it's a superior calculator because your calculations are actually archived, as opposed to a calculator where your calculations are not archived. You don't know what numbers you put into your calculator. So let's just calculate the average of this. And actually, before I calculate the average, let me just show you how to use, in general, formulas in a spreadsheet. So a formula can be something like this. They always start with an equal sign. And we can do something like 2 plus 2. And if we click on the cell and we go up to the formula bar, we see the formula. But in the cell itself, we see the value of the computation of that formula. All right. So recognize the different kinds of mathematical symbols or notation that we can use, right? 2 plus 2, 2 times 2, 2, 2 divided by 2, 2 minus 2, and something like 2 caret squared, that is 2 squared. Oops, let's get the equal sign, right? So those are formulas, and we're going to be using formulas a lot in this class, right? Notice that the formulas that I just used aren't super useful, but we can do something like this. We can write I can click into a cell. So now it's saying, okay, take the value of C3, and we're going to add to that the value of C4. And we're going to add to that the value of C5. And we're going to add to that the value of C6, add to that the value of C7, add to that the value of C8, add to that the value of C9, add the value of C10, add to that the value of C11, add to that the value of C12, right? So there's the sum, and if we want to make a mean, we now need to divide that by the number of values that we summed, and that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? And there's that value. So notice that Excel is smart enough that we don't need to put the number 60 or the value in that cell. We can just simply put the cell there. And the beauty of that is, let's say we realized that we made a mistake and this fish really isn't 60 millimeters, but it's 64. What happened? Look what happens when I change this value to 64. The mean changes. What? Watch the mean, right? It's changed. It's updated. So that's the beauty of a spreadsheet. It's why you should throw your calculator away. If you had made this calculation with a calculator and then you realized one of the numbers was wrong, you'd have to redo the calculation, the entire calculation. All right? One of the nice things about Excel formulas is that Excel has built-in functions, so we don't need to do something like manually add each of these cells, which is time-consuming and would be especially time-consuming if we had hundreds of cells to add. So a function looks something like this. Let's just delete that cell, and now we're going to put an equal sign, and we're going to use the function sum. And you can probably guess what the sum function does. The sum function is going to sum a bunch of values, or the values in a set of cells. And instead of putting in each of these cells manually or individually, we just want to sum all of the cells within a range. So I can type that range. We want to go, the range is C3 through C12. So I can type C3 through C12, right? And you can see that Excel or Google Sheets has highlighted it. And I can close parentheses and then hit return, and it gives me the sum, right? Probably easier way of doing that, or an alternative way of doing that, is type sum, click in the first cell, hold down, don't just click, but click, hold, and then drag. So click and drag across the range that you want to sum up. And you can see it fills that range in, it's filling that range, and it's filling in that range in the formula bar. Right? So now we can compute the mean using Excel functions. And the mean would be the sum of those over the count. And Excel even has a count function. So we can just type count. We can click and drag the range. And we can get the count, or we can get the average length, right? But we're going to have to do some formula like this, but for the average or the mean, we don't actually need to use this complicated formula because Excel has an average function. So let's just delete that and just use the function average. And then click and drag the range of cells that we want to average, and there we have it. All right. The beauty of a wide format in a spreadsheet is that now that we've got the average for the freshwater fish, we want to do that again for each of these other columns. All right. And we could just type that function in for each of these other columns. But an easier way to do that is to fill across, right? And I'm going to fill across by highlighting the cell that I've put the formula in. I'm going to grab that little handle, the bottom right of the box, and I'm just going to click and pull it across. All right, and you see we've populated it with numbers. We certainly want to check and see what are these numbers. So if I click into that cell and I look at the formula, I see that there's a formula in this cell. And that formula is average D3 through D12. So it's the average of this range right here. So notice what we've done. When we fill the formula to the right, the column moved to the right with it. That's a very, very powerful feature of spreadsheets, right? We get the same phenomenon if we were to fill down, right? So for example, we don't want to do this. I'm just going to copy and paste. But let's say we wanted the average of these four numbers. That average isn't meaningful. And we want to compute the average for each of these rows. I highlight the number, I grab the handle, and I fill down. All right? Very, very powerful tool in a spreadsheet. Okay. Let's compute a few more things. We want the standard deviation and we want the standard error. And this is something you will be computing in a couple of weeks in lab. So Excel or Google Sheets has a formula for standard deviation, and that formula has several formulas, but the one I want you to use is STD, right? Oops, it's STDEV. So there it is right there. Notice that there are others. STDEV.P, STDEV.S. That STDEV is actually equivalent to this STDEV.S, but let's not use those. Let's just use STDEV. That is the standard deviation that we want to use, right? We'll talk about what a standard deviation is in a later class. But we want to compute the standard deviation. It's a measure of the variability of a set of numbers. So this will be a measure of the variability of these numbers right here. So equals STD, open parentheses, click and drag, and we have, oops, we want not STD, we want STDEV, and we have the standard deviation. All right, one of the things that we want to make sure of is that we don't have a bunch of junky numbers after the decimal point that have no meaning, right? Right now, we've only measured this basically to an integer. So let's just leave one decimal place after the 2. So I'm going to click on that. We've got these numbers here, which can increase or decrease the number of decimal places shown. So let's decrease it. There we go. All right. Now we want to compute something like the standard error of the mean. The standard error of the mean is an estimate of the precision of our mean. How precise was our estimate? If the standard error is big, then there's going to be a lot of variability in estimating this mean. A way to think about that is if we came back and we measured 10 fish, we might get a quite different mean. But if our standard error is small, then if we come back and measure 10 fish, our means should all be very close to each other. So Excel does not have a formula for the standard error of the mean, but the standard error of the mean is equal to the standard deviation over the square root of the count. Right? So we want to put that formula right here. So that is equal to the standard deviation. I'm going to click in the cell above it because that's the standard deviation. I'm going to divide, and then we want to divide by, I need to use the function square root, and I want it to be the square root of the count, and instead of counting the number of values and putting that number in there, I'm going to use the function count, and I want you to use the function count. Right, so there's our standard error. Again, we don't have, we've got many more digits here than are significant. So let's go down to 1 decimal place. All right, let's highlight those 2 values, grab the little handle, move it across, and now we have the standard deviation and the standard error for all of those columns of data. All right. The last super important tool to use is if we have, and this is going to be, we're going to make use of this in a different project, but the project is going to be something like this. I'm just going to put a bunch of numbers in here. 100, 23, 45, 78, 109, 14. And I'm going to title it Some Numbers. All right. Let's say I want to divide all of these numbers by the number here. Right? So I want to divide 100 by 10, 23 by 10, 45 by 10, 78 by 10, etc. All right? And we're going to put those right here. There's equal. I click on 100. I click on 10. And I've got 100 by 10. All right? Let's number these. Right, now I'm going to fill this down. If we look at the formula of our values, we see that the numerator, which should be C6, is in fact C6, but the denominator needs to stay the cell in C3, right? But instead, since we've moved down 1 row, that denominator has moved down 1 row. So it's trying to divide 23 by the value of this cell, which is not even a number, and it's giving you something, it's giving you junk, right? What we want to do is we want to keep the denominator constant in this formula, And we can keep the row constant by putting a dollar bill in front of that C. We can keep the column constant by putting a dollar bill in front of we can keep the column constant by putting a dollar bill in front of the address of the column. We can keep the row constant by putting a dollar bill sign in front of the address of the row, or we can keep them both constant, right? So what do we want to keep constant here as we move down? Our column doesn't change, so that's fine. What is changing is the row, but we want to keep it row 3. So we want to keep the row constant. So I want to put a dollar bill sign in front of that 3. Now, when I fill down, the denominator is C3. The denominator is C3. The denominator is C3. You see that the denominator has stayed constant, which is really beautiful. And now we have the list of these numbers all divided by that one single number. So we'll come back to the use of that dollar bill sign. I'm not sure that we're going to use it in the first project, but we will definitely be using it in later projects.